When you don't want to do something, you say, because of reasons known only to my confessor and my spiritual director, I must decline.
Really well-worn shoes, the same ones I met in 2013. He's still wearing them.
I would like to take this moment to announce my retirement.
So Tito, you're a bit of a foodie, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
It's not a fat joke. I'm just, you like to eat the finer things in life. You got a refined palate. I have a tough question for you.
Okay.
Okay. You get one condiment for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You can't eat anything else.
Okay.
But here's the catch. You have to put that condiment on everything you eat.
Okay.
What are you picking?
Hot sauce. Easy.
You're putting hot sauce on your cereal?
Yeah. I don't eat cereal, so it all works.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's easy.
Okay. See, I was going to go that route, but I just thought like all the things where hot sauce would be just a bit too much, like my yogurt in the morning. I'm not sure about that. I think I'm going somewhat predictably the white person route. I'm going mayo because mayo will mix into everything with no flair. The irony being I don't even like mayo. So it would make everything a little bit worse, but not terribly worse.
So here's the thing. I thought about mayo. It did cross my mind because I'm like, it is a good all-arounder. But then I was like, no, every time I'm eating something, I don't say every time, but most of the time when I'm eating stuff, I'm like, this could use a little more heat. So I went hot sauce.
Yeah. I don't think I'm brave enough for that, but I think it's a great choice.
Thank you. So, all right, I'm going to introduce our guest now. And this guy, I'm not sure where he stands on hot sauce, but he's definitely experienced, if maybe not all of the finer things in life, some of the spicier things in life, just kind of been everywhere and done a whole lot. Let's welcome Father Michael Perry.
Oh, good morning and thank you. And by the way, I would go with hot sauce, not mayo.
Hot sauce, man. I like it.
Yeah.
It is what I hope to be. It's my bold side, but yeah.
Take the jump. Once you turn, you won't turn back.
Yeah, I mean, I would put sriracha on almost everything. It's just, that yogurt in the morning. I don't know. But yeah, you've probably eaten some interesting things in your life. You've lived in Africa. You've been all around the world. Would you say that there's something that you've eaten that's the strangest thing you've ever heard of?
Probably there are caterpillars that are, you have to, the base of a palm tree. When the palm trees are dying, the people cut them down, but they dig up the roots, and they dig up the roots because there's still something left that they can get out of them. They can get these white slugs, and they have to cook them. They put them in oil, palm oil, or other oils, but mostly palm oil. You mix it with a little bit of onion, a little bit of garlic, put a little bit of hot sauce in there, and they're a little chewy, but they're actually pretty
a little chewy.
I like those even better than the termites I used to eat. But termites,
oh my gosh,
we'd eat them live sometimes. But, yeah.
Oh gosh.
Okay, hold on. What did it taste like? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
It tasted probably more like the palm oil than the actual slug, if you will, the actual caterpillar. So it was with the spices. There wasn't a strong taste. It was, but there was the reason why people ate them is because there was a lot of nutrients in them and protein. So it was a way of getting supplementing the diet. Yeah.
So I would just do that, and I would pretend it's tofu.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. The texture looks a little similar.
So getting to the heart of the matter, Michael, you have had an illustrious career, something that very few people can say. You were former Minister General of the Order. You were the Brown Pope? Is that a term you ever used?
No, I never had it. First time to pick up anything, but yeah, illustrious. I don't know. I think one thought that jumps to my mind always, and if I can get a little biblical here, is the thought of Philippians, where Jesus goes down, he doesn't go up. And I think the one important thing about the role of service, like as minister and servant, which was something that Francis insisted on in his title, was it's all about going down, not about God. It's about stooping down, about reaching down, about placing oneself at the feet. And it's at the feet where we begin to get a new perspective. We get an entirely different view of the world. And I think that's something which, illustrious in that sense, yes. From that perspective, it illustrated a lot of different things that I could see and discover, not only about myself, about God, but about the world, about our brothers and sisters in different places. So yes, it was illustrious in that sense.
I'm sure you got to see lots of different places.
Yeah, someone asked me, how many places have you actually been to? And I said, well, I've actually been in country for a minimum of 2 days in 100 countries. But so what? I mean, Yeah, but that sounds, okay. That sounds like, great, great for frequent flyers and things like that,
Yeah.
for college. But the one thing that I learned was it's not the number of places that you rack up; it's the quality of time that you spend at each of those places. That's why I count those a minimum 2 days, and I usually try to stay 5 or 6, listening first, and then trying to interact with people, and then making a few comments at the end. So, yeah, it's an incredible world that we live in, absolutely incredible. But also, it's a world that really is such need of being humanized and being relationalized, and that's my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick, Tito, name 100 countries.
No.
I don't think I could.
I mean, I could probably get close, but it'd take a while.
You might surprise yourself. I mean, and then there are all these little countries you've never heard of. You'd have to go to the mapping of the UN in order to even discover that they actually exist. So, yeah.
So I mean, I'm just thinking, like, you became a minister general, but your rise to minister general wasn't sort of like the traditional rise, right? You started off as the vicar general.
Well, so it goes back even further. I started off in my province, the former province it was out of St. Louis, and there 2 times I refused. The brothers wanted to put my name forward, and I told them not to. The third time, after the second time, the oldest member of the chapter stood up and said, "Tell us the next time in 3 years we can put your name down." And I was working in Washington at the time. Some of you might remember I was working at the Bishops' Conference, and I was teaching at WTU. And I came up with the typical Washington response, which was to subvert the answer and not really ever respond. Yeah. And he said, "I don't want that." He was from Missouri. He said, "I don't want that Washington slang. I want to know, are you yes or no?"
Straight answer.
And so I think that's what got me in trouble. I finally had to say I would if the brothers decided that they wanted me to serve them, then I would accept. And then I only served for 11 months. I was the second shortest minister provincial in my region. I thought I took the record, but I didn't. There was someone who had a heart attack and died after 6 months.
Oh my gosh!
He beat me.
For good reasons.
Yeah. So anyway, but it was, and then from there I went to the chapter, and I was on the third week of the chapter. I was taken to coffee at the McDonald's near the train station at Assisi. Some of you have been there already. You know where it is.
I've been there, yeah.
Yep.
And I was told that that following day they were going to put my name down. They were going to. A number of conferences came together, and so they were going to put my name down to be the candidate for the vicar general, which is the number 2, if you will, the assistant to the minister and servant. And so I said no. I said, "This is crazy. What are you talking about? I spent 11 months listening. I wanted to go back and start doing something in the province."
Sure.
You
are definitely a doer.
And I couldn't. I think some of the brothers were praying that I would not return. So they weren't ready. They didn't want the change, so they weren't.
Well, Michael, I think it might be a little too late in your life at this point. Let me give you a bit of advice, something that Friar taught me, which is when you don't want to do something, you say, "Because of reasons known only to my confessor and my spiritual director, I must decline."
Okay, there you go.
Would have helped you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it might. Yeah, I'm sure.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. With the brothers, just be ready for anything. That's the one thing.
Sure.
And with life, be ready for anything, because life catches us completely up with our feet up in the air. We think we're going one direction, we're certain, we're clear, everything's, and then all of a sudden something comes along and says, "No, you're not going that way. You've got to go a different direction." So it's just interesting, life, and I mean, I call it the working of the Spirit, but it really, life itself also is amazing. It offers us opportunities that we could never even think of.
So I have a question now. How would you define the role of the vicar general? Because, like, I understand the role of the minister general, but the only comparison I have for the vicar general is the vice president, which is, in some ways, they have certain responsibilities, but also certain ceremonial responsibilities. What would you define as the responsibilities of the vicar general?
About the same as in the United States. If you look at the U.S. Constitution, you look at the definition of the role of the vice president, you will find 2 sentences, and that's it.
Okay.
To serve, he's to serve, to respect the Constitution, and he is to be at the service of the president. And that's it. And that's really what so respect the constitutions and the rule of life, and be at the service of the Minister General. And that's it. There's no definition. So I had to create my own role. I had to create my own role because the former Minister General traveled a lot. He was very busy. And so he said, you stay back, you stay in Rome. If something comes up, you can take care of it, which really never came up because I had no defined role. So I created one. I got involved in fundraising. I got involved in building relationships between the different conferences. And then I spent time just trying to strengthen the learning of Italian and trying to get to know a little bit what Italy was like, get to know the people, get to know families, etc. So I tried to understand the context in which I was living and make the best of it. And then I was also occasionally being sent a ceremony. I would go to different countries and I would represent the Minister General and the order in those countries or go to meetings in the Vatican. So, yes.
I'm curious, going to these countries, you talked about relationships when we started back. Is there something that really touches you, that really changed your life in a way? I mean, you had visited other countries before you were even vicar. You'd been around the world a bit. Was there something you'd never heard of or a person you never not thought you'd meet that you just said, wow, I see the world differently now?
Yeah, so I met a couple of the church leaders and Catholic church leaders, bishops in the countries X, Y, and Z, in the Congo, in Kenya, in Uganda, in South Africa, in Sudan. It was one Sudan at that time, and then later in 2011 it was two Sudans, Sudan and Sudan, South Sudan. I met some absolutely incredible, not just church leaders, I also met some incredible Christians, just people who were trying to live their lives and really committed to seeking the way of trying to promote peace in their country and trying to call people to responsibility, their government leaders, but not only calling church leaders to responsibility. So there are three that stand out maybe in particular. One, the case of Giambattista Odama, the Archbishop of Gulu, which was under attack constantly by what was called the Lord's Resistance Army, which still exists, by the way, founded by a Catholic woman and a man, and they turned this religious thing into a political thing and into a militarized rebel group against the government, which continues in Uganda. So I think this was meeting that bishop and listening to his stories, that he stayed even when the groups came in and the territory. He was later on recommended or nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Then he also when the call was to bring to justice the head of the Lord's Resistance Army. The Archbishop said he went to The Hague and he says, I will stand in his place, I will serve his sentence if he can find refuge and if he's willing to leave the country and go someplace and leave the people in peace. You talk about martyrdom.
Wow.
This is a modern day sacrifice of one's entire future. He would throw his career away. He would throw his life away for the sake of his people. That's something which really stands out. I met another archbishop who I was asked to, on the way to the White House, I picked him up at the airport, and on the way to the White House, because I had been contacted the day before by someone from the White House, I met them in coffee. I felt like I was in a 007 James Bond movie. Because they said, we can't meet at the White House, we'll meet at this coffee shop. I went to the coffee shop. I took my collar off. We met there informally, and he told me that the President of the United States was asking me to intervene, to ask this archbishop to serve, to run as president of his country.
Oh my gosh!
What in the world? What? I know it's being filmed. I know this thing is being filmed because it cannot be. This can't be. And I said,
the president knows who I am? I think I'm worried about that.
Well, I don't think he knew who I was, but he knew I was working at the bishop's conference. So I called my boss and I said, what am I supposed to do? I've got to pick up the archbishop tomorrow. You're out of office. He says, just take the message, tell the archbishop what you heard. And so the following day, I picked him up at the airport, and he had ordered there was a limousine. We picked up, we drove, driving into the White House, into the West Wing, and I'm telling him, by the way, the United States government and the president's asking you to run for president. And he leaned back, and he's very, very intelligent, hyper-intelligent man. And he told me, he says, that will ruin the credibility of the church. It'll ruin my credibility. He said, well, we'll listen. So we went into the meeting. During the meeting, we talked about everything else except that. Not one word came up in that during the meeting. And I thought, what is going on here? I couldn't say anything because I had that secret meeting the day before, and I didn't want to tell him what I put in my coffee, hot sauce. No.
Yeah.
So,
Gotta love secret DC meetings. Yeah.
so after the meeting with the National Security Advisor in the West Wing of the White House, we leave, and the bishop then tells me the Archbishop on the way back to the house, he was staying with another missionary group. He says, "Please inform that I'm very pleased that they're concerned about our country, etc. But just tell them I'm a man of God, and that a man of God does not serve as a politician, because otherwise the church, God, everything gets messed up." So he said, just tell them thank you, but tell them please to continue to support the efforts that we're doing, the church is doing in the country. It was end of story. I called the guy the next day. We went again and met at a coffee shop, and I told him, I said, I've got to end this movie here, because there's not going to be any sequence after this. So that was it. I mean, that was fascinating. You think about it. And I mean,
yeah. And so bizarre, too. I mean, you would think that the president or someone in the office or something would know, like, yeah, the church is probably not going to go for this. I mean, we're long past, the church ruling worlds and desiring that. Hopefully, we don't want to get back into that. I think it's probably even against canon law. I don't know, to take office as a canonical person, a clerical person.
It is, but they made an exception in Benin for an archbishop to run the political process for about 3 or 4 years, and they did the same thing in Kinshasa in Congo. They allowed one of the archbishops to run the political process. So and they only did that is to give a break. I mean, so that the political process might have a chance to breathe again. But then in both cases, in the Benin they had success. They got a new president who was much more democratic. In the Congo, Mobutu returned, so there was no change. So it just continued. So.
Yeah, I could see that being a nice kind of stopgap to say, like, let's get a palate cleanser here. We trust the church. Let the church just make the right moral decisions that doesn't have skin in the game, and then hand it back to a better reset button. But I also see it going terribly wrong. I don't think I would want to be in that position.
Yeah, no, I think so. Just another story, but these are some of the places I was in Sudan when the war was on between the North and South. We were traveling with several bishops. We went into the conflict zones. We could hear the bombing, and it wasn't far away. And in one of those places, we spent the evening, and the commander got up and told us we saw all these young children, and just asked who were they. And the commander said, "Well, these, we've ransomed these. We got them back from the rebel groups, and we're feeding them now. We're going to get them back to their homes." And in the course of that, when he finished, he sat down. He was about 10 feet tall. I mean, he was 7 feet, and he was very dark-skinned, strong individual. And then he sat down, and the priest and the catechist stood up, and they started talking about their work and stuff. And they said, "Of course, and we know that these children are being fattened to be sent to the front lines." And then the commander stood up and said, "Well, excuse me, that's not true." And he said, "Please sit down." And he put the same line out again of what he was saying. And what they were doing is they were feeding these children. They had collected them back from the different rebel groups, but they were preparing them to serve in the southern Sudan efforts against the North at the time. And it was courageous to see this priest and this catechist, lay catechist, stand up, and both of them before the commander. He could have had them executed right there. And to my knowledge, I got word months after that, they were still alive. So I guess they survived. But they kind of knew what was at stake, and they were willing to, because they wanted someone to know. There's no justification in that case, even if you're defending yourself against an oppressor coming from the North, the Sudan government at the time. There's no justification for certain things. Some things are not admitted. So these
it's so powerful to hear stories like that. And we've had a couple interviews. We talked with Andy Brophy, who's in the mission office. We've talked with Mike Sarufka, who worked for the UN, in the Franciscans International. Now you sharing your stories of going around the world. I think there's a perception in the Western world that the Catholic Church is out of touch or not really involved in the right things, and there's an argument to be made there. But when you hear stories in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, you hear these stories of heroism. You say, this is the most relevant organization on the earth. And it's so frustrating for me to talk with people in the Western world that can only see their little street in Boston and say, well, that's what the Catholic Church is. But the Catholic Church is so universal and so wide and dealing with so many huge issues. Did you find that traveling around that the friars were just so different from place to place and so heroic in ways that the common person doesn't know?
Well, yes, maybe, and no. All three, I think, work. And I
Yes.
think there are some cases where friars were on the front lines on some of these issues. I'm thinking of the for migrants. I know it's very polarized here in terms of migrants and currently what's going on in the United States. My grandparents came from Ireland. My great aunts and uncles. I've got a little bit different view on things, and having traveled and seen where people are leaving from, the violent situations where they are no longer can live. I listened to a story, friars working in Chiapas in the La 72. It's a wonderful center that cares
I
for
spent
people.
2 months there.
Yeah, okay, so you understand. And the story of a father and mother and their 4 children, and they have five children. They think they still have five. But the oldest boy was taken by the Maras Salvatrucci, and 13 in Salvador. And that was the straw that they could not stay because they had 4 of their children. They were afraid one would be taken after the other. And they still didn't know. When I met them 4 years ago, they didn't know where their son was. And they said if they stayed, the cycle was going to repeat. So they were fleeing for the sake of their 4 and their children. And when I saw them met them in La 72, in this center that received and kept people for long period of time, and hundreds of people, they told their story and how the father and the mother just were in tears because they had no idea where the child was. A second daughter, the oldest daughter who was with them, had been violated by gangs in Mexico, and so they were dealing with that. And it just seemed like there was no place where they could rest their head, no place where they could breathe and say, we're safe. This is a place where we can build our future. And I think there, just to see the witness of the friars, the welcoming, the accompaniment, that's tough work when you're listening to those stories day in and day out. That's just a lot of, So another story comes to mind is the work of some of the friars in South Africa. I remember, and this brings little tears to my eyes because I remember a mother standing holding her, I think he was 8 months at the time, or 9-month-old baby that looked like about a month. She had been infected with HIV and had unfortunately transmitted it to the child. The child, she was standing there, and when we met her, I was with the Franciscan cardinal, he was the former Archbishop of Durban, one of our guys who had studied in Ireland and in Rome, Cardinal Napier. And Cardinal Napier also had tears in his eyes because this woman standing there, why would God let this happen? Why would anything so bad have to happen to such a young little my son? And it was the reason I remember the story is because his son's name was Michael, and and I've never forgotten that story. And she,
What do you say? Do you have an answer to that question in that situation?
no, the only thing, the one thing I could say is the friars were there. There were other people there. The church was there, standing with her in her pain, and with Michael who was dying, and they didn't leave. They stayed until the end, and I think this is something else. Asa, you talked about this. You said that some people don't think about what the church is, where it is the closeness of the church through its people. It's not the church. It's the believers. It's men and women and young people and older people who are witnessing in some way or another. They know that faith has something to do with life and has something to do with giving life, and that's what I witnessed. I witnessed so much of that, giving life and giving hope, giving joy, giving solace, giving just a moment and a space for just peace and be able to be received and feel that they are at home for a moment and safe. And I think these are
Well, and it's not just a feel-good consolation. Our theology is so incarnational. It's not just God is up in the heavens and he should intervene by doing some miracle. It's God says, Jesus himself says, I will be with you always. I'm with the poor. I am with you when you mourn. There's some power to the fact that he says, love God and love your neighbor. And when you do so, you make me present. And so I think when people ask, where is God? You just look around. You're like, clearly, he's right here.
Yes, yeah, I think that's right. And there's another Franciscan, although he's never admitted that he is, Pope Francis. I've had a chance to meet him on different occasions, and I want to bring him in because I think it's important. He demonstrates in a clear way the central values of a Franciscan approach to life. And again, he's not. When you do this, you're in contested territory because people like it or don't like it. He really challenges people. But I'm still reminded of one of the first things he did after he was elected Pope. When he went for Holy Thursday, he went to the prison in Rome, and he washed the feet of people there, including a Muslim woman, and that was his way of saying this is what the gospel life is about. It's about bending down. It's about caring for people. It's about raising people's dignity, or allowing them giving them space so they can do it themselves, so they can demonstrate and shine and show all the goodness. And I think this is, again, another person I've met along the way a number of different times now, and just recently with a visit from Siena College with the Board of Trustees and some friars, had a chance to very briefly meet with the Pope, only about 10, 15 minutes, but he was aware of efforts here to try to address the climate challenges, change of environment, the environment and the climate change, and he was brief well, and he told the trustees, keep forward in this. We have to work together. We have to move forward. So this is Pope Francis is a Christian. He's a believer. He's a human being who's demonstrating values. He just happens to wear a white suit and black really well worn shoes. The same ones I met in 2013, he's still wearing them. So,
well, now I'm curious. He's a controversial figure for a lot, and I think at least in the West, we've got our values a bit of a mess at times. But so we're focused on the wrong things. But I'm wondering, almost tongue in cheek, but kind of serious, is the most controversial thing about him that he has a Franciscan heart, that he's challenging this idea of kind of a rigid theological thinking, and rather is focused on relationships and focused on subservience and focused on the environment and universal connectivity. These are not things that we're used to. Is that what is most upsetting to people, or is it something more obvious?
I think there are a couple other things too. He's challenging people to rethink how we live our lifestyles, how we share our resources, how we concentrate or not our wealth, and the impact that has on people. It reminds me of something from a 14th century Franciscan, Peter John Olivi, who said that anybody who this is strong. So you can but Peter John Olivi,
sitting down.
Anyone who concentrates wealth without sharing it is committing a sin, because they're stealing from the poor. And that goes back to St. Ambrose already in the 4th century. So it's interesting. I don't think Pope Francis uses those similar words, but I think the economic vision that he has is not radical Marxism from Latin America or socialism. It is a vision, a gospel vision that says, taken from Acts of the Apostles, that says, when we are blessed, we share. When we suffer, we share. And it's so that all times we share, and that we cannot, these concentrations. I think that's another dimension, perhaps, besides the service model, et cetera. He's calling for a radical rethink, a reset on the economy, on politics. He's even saying that we might have to learn how to live with a little less sovereignty individually, so that we can have a type of not a Star Wars world order that ended up, we saw, if anybody followed those movies, you know what happened with that. You get
the First Order. That's us.
You get the First Order, yeah. But I think he's calling for us to rethink and everything based around the idea of this interconnectedness, this solidarity, this universal fraternity. And if there's anything less or more Franciscan, I don't know what it is. That's it. That's the heart of what Francis says, to the point where Francis even calls the creatures by name. He calls them brothers and sisters and Mother Earth. What a kinship model of existence, of life. And Pope Francis, this is radical stuff, because as radical as the gospel, and as radical as what God, I think, intended from the book of Genesis, and somewhere along about the 9th chapter, 10th chapter of Genesis, where God resets everything with humanity and does it again. All these resets that keep going on, but repeating the same call, the same challenge, telling us that we are one another, we are each other, we are in each other, we are through each other, and all with all of creation. And I think this is a message that's it takes time to first to understand it, and then to digest it. So I'm not hopeless on any of this. I think it's just we have to help each other. We have to help each other come to understand what this means, and not give up, and be patient with people who are struggling perhaps more than others.
I think what a lot of people struggle with in terms of looking at Pope Francis and comparing him to sort of his predecessors is they have difficulty, I think, seeing the relationship between the two. That he isn't sort of in tension to the other two, but in relationship to, and I'm using Pope John Paul II and Benedict because those are the ones who were alive in my lifetime. But they had very strong devotional and very strong prayer lives, right? And they encouraged devotional prayer lives in the people and in the church. And Pope Francis is taking that and saying, now prayer transforms us and we enter into discipleship. And that's the part that he's kind of really trying to emphasize. But I think a lot of people are struggling with that because for so many of them, the prayer became the end goal rather than the transformative effect. And I think all of us are challenged by that at some point and in some way.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want to set up the dichotomy. As you all know, Benedict XVI was the Green Pope before Francis, and he called for wealth redistribution, and John Paul II was for labor unions, and I think there are a lot of things we forget about them because of some other aspects of their careers. I would love to compare some things that Pope Francis said to what the other two said and see if people can know the difference.
Yeah,
because he's not so radically different. It's not like some new tradition. It's just he lives a life in a particularly different way that stands out to people. People are listening for once.
Yeah, he's doing something which Francis of Assisi was accused of. It's performance. You perform your way into the gospel life. And I think this is something very different. There's a Franciscan scholar in Florida, Timothy Johnson, who's written about this, and it's very interesting because he says that Francis, a lot of times this whole question about preach and if you need to use words, what that story doesn't say is act, though, demonstrate through your life, witness it. It's like a theater, if you will, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. But what is liturgy? Liturgy is a theatrical performance in the highest sense of the term, where we're trying to create a sense of a very dramatic sense of God's presence, and then try to raise the, if you will, raise the curtain on what's going on in the life of the world, our lives through the celebration. And I think the performance of the gospel that Pope Francis is doing, I think, is he went to the Republic of Central Africa in the middle of a war when there are two sides. He goes into the camps to both sides, and he goes to the Muslim camp. Well, he actually meets with the church a little bit and some people, and then he goes to the Muslim camp, and then he comes to the Christian side for celebrating Mass. What did he do also when he went to Iraq? He went to meet with al-Sistani first, the head of the Shiite, if you will, kind of considered to be a spiritual reference point. And then after that, he had a meeting with the Christians. So I think he's showing us a performance of the gospel, the implications of it, but rather than using, although he's eloquent with his words too, but rather than that, he really is. And I think John Paul II. I've been to Poland a number of times to visit the friars, and the one thing no matter what you say about John Paul II, he was a radical political figure in that country. It was because of his actions and a lot of Christians who were willing to back him up, and other labor leaders and other things. That country, the curtain fell. They brought the wall down, and there's no question about it. And he was strategic and he was political. We got to be careful not to. Strategy and politics are not excluded from holiness.
No. And I think it's a great example of, I think John Paul II was probably exactly what we needed during the Cold War, and someone coming from that country and the shrewdness that he had politically to get things done, and the iron fist to stand for what is true and what is good. And now I think with the rise of nationalism in a lot of places these days, growing division, it's not just, A versus B, it's like everyone against each other. Having someone like Francis that's modeling something different and is a little more open to discussion and synodality and just the document Fratelli Tutti, being brothers with all. I think that's exactly what we need right now. You flip them a couple generations and they might both be failures. Who knows?
And everybody wants him to do what everybody else is doing. take sides, choose a winner and a loser, who's right and wrong. And he's getting a lot of criticism for not condemning Putin publicly. He's condemned the war, but he tries not to name the people. He's not condemned publicly the church leaders in the Orthodox Church in Moscow. He's been very careful, and his politics in China has also have produced a lot of concern and a lot of reaction on the part of some Catholics in the United States. I'd say a number of them, all the way up to the former Secretary of State.
Nuncio?
Visit Pompey when he went to Washington. But I think Francis, he knows people know that where the church stands on these issues. And I think he wants to, if the church can be a credible player, to bring peace, to bring people to the table. He doesn't want them to isolate and make that. And this is something which the church, over 2,000 years of diplomacy. A lot of diplomats. I've met a lot of diplomats, by the way. I've gone to, I've met, the ambassadors. I've met other people along the way, and they always and I've been to a few of these cocktail parties in countries where the ambassadors all were there, and the ambassador from the church was there as well. What's called an apostolic nuncio, and they were as sophisticated, those nuncios, as not all of them, but many of them were as sophisticated as
not to name names.
Not all of those ambassadors, well, because not all those ambassadors are the brightest bulbs in the room either. So but I think the important thing, church representatives, the church understands it's got to be in the heart of what's going on if it wants to try to affect change, positive change. If you're going to stand and throw stones from the outside, you won't get in. If you're inside and you're willing to listen and you take a little bit longer view, unfortunately, there are people who suffer along the way. That's unfortunate, and I don't know what the solution is for that. But the church creates a space, maintains a space, so that all people feel that they have dignity, and then it's only on those terms in the end that you can even begin to approach a question of compromise and of peace. So.
Yeah, what's funny is what you're talking about actually makes me think of something that I heard from a family therapist one time, that they always tell people, the minute you start to engage in name calling, like, saying you're the bad guy or you're doing this or you're this, you shut down dialogue. The minute you engage in all of that. And what's necessary for a family to grow and be healthy is the ability to engage in dialogue. And when you think about that in the wider context of, these international politics, the minute Pope Francis comes out and says Putin is a bad guy or Putin, all dialogue is going to be shut down, right? The minute he does any of that. And while I think it is important for, people to be able to identify these actions that he's doing are terrible. This war that he's doing is terrible. It's important for the people at the top to be able to engage in dialogue still and hopefully change and bring about an end to this.
Yeah.
Well, and I think with that name calling, you live up to what you're called. I think that there's some narrative that defines our lives sometimes, and if you get called something a certain number of times, you just start to act like that. I think you can do it the other way, which is you invite people to rise to the occasion. And I remember learning this from our preaching class, that sometimes you thank people for doing things they haven't done yet. And you applaud them for things that they should be doing that they haven't done yet, but you just say, you're so wonderful doing this. And then they're like, yeah, thank you. I should continue to work towards that. But if you go kind of like, you're so bad, you should be doing this, it's belittling and demoralizing, and then you end up just giving up.
Yeah. There's another, stories. Our lives are narratives, so we just tell stories. So another story, and this is a little bit to the contrary, but it actually, I think, in case of the point you just, it underscores the point. I went with the former president of the Bishops' Conference. We went to Nairobi, and we met with President Daniel Arap Moi at the time. Tall guy, very lean, and had been in power for a very long time. And we went with the Archbishop Ndingi. He's deceased now, so I can use his name, but he was very short, and he was also very skinny. And they knew each other. They'd met each other over the years. So Ndingi, we go into this meeting, and we're talking, and we're raising some questions, some concerns. There was a missionary, a Mill Hill missionary, who had been murdered in Kenya because he was defending human rights, and probably by some people in the local government. The U.S. government at first tried to cover it up, and then they realized that they couldn't. But they tried to cover. We found out later they tried to cover it up because they were trying to get Daniel Moy to step down from power and get a new president in. So it was geopolitics. But when we were there at the end of the meeting, after we'd raised questions, the president graciously responded in his political fashion. Before we get up, we're getting up to leave, and the Archbishop sits back down for a while. He says, "Well, Your Excellency, I just want to thank you for what a wonderful job you've done over these years as president." Which, well, okay, that
a bit of a stretch, probably.
Oh, big stretch, And he said, "You did such a good job. You prepared us now. You can step down, and someone else can come in." And I looked at the bishop who was with me, the archbishop, and I thought, we're not getting out of here. They must have a gulag in the basement. We're going to be locked up. No one will ever hear from us again. And but without skipping a beat, the president responded, "Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. I know that you've been wonderful to work with over these years, and we'll continue our relationship since I'm going to continue because the people need me." And the bishop came back.
Oh, no.
The bishop right away came back and he said, "Yes, but really, we're really prepared to move on and to learn and use all the tools and 1 year later, I was back again with another bishop. We met the president again, and at the end of the session, the same question, the same. 6 months later, the president retired from office. So
okay.
I don't think
it's a soft sell. Yeah,
Dengue wasn't the only one, but he was trying to encourage, and he had been in contact with diplomats from around the world, so he knew there was support. There would be support for transition. So these.
Well, such a complicated thing. You go back to Pope Francis and some of the difficulties he has. Let's say that guy gets up and says, "You're a terrible person. We've hated working with you. You need to step down." You force that man to stay in power because he's not going to bow to you.
That's right.
Yeah. But if you say you've done a wonderful job, now's the time to step down. You do this soft sell. You kind of sneak in. There are going to be some that say, "Look at this archbishop. Look at this person supporting this dictator," whatever.
Right.
We're playing the long game here.
Right.
You got to read between the lines.
Yeah. I especially like that line of "You've prepared us, for the next step." It's such a diplomatic way of saying it.
Yeah. But it's just I'm thinking something else. We have something called secular Franciscans around the world. There are probably about 350,000 of them, and they're people who've made profession to a way of life, a gospel way of life. And I've met them along the way too, and some of the incredible stories that the things that they're doing for human rights, the care for prisoners, the cooperatives that they've created with women who in situations where otherwise it would not be possible to make any economic advance. Just visiting people who are sick, and particularly during the most difficult years when the HIV virus was hitting Africa very hard in a different way, the care that people were doing, just going and they were washing and cleaning and the love they showed and the dignity that they gave to people, or not didn't give them, but they valued their dignity. They helped the people understand that they really are beloved children of God, no matter what was going on. Those stories are just repeated in their work in question about the environment, planting trees and trying to clean up the cities and other things. So it's just amazing. Some of them are involved at very high level stakes, also with trying to broker peace in Mozambique and in Uganda and other places. So I'm just amazed at the Franciscan witness that is, and those who are not Franciscan, but who have so identified with us that they use Francis as the kind of the model, and that's the person they present when they go and talk about trying to, in their role of service, in their role of even in leadership in governments, etc. The impact of Francis and Franciscan values on their lives, and they see this as guiding. They see this as a way forward. I think it's amazing. Yeah.
So to pivot a little bit, we've talked about your past. We've talked about Africa. You're working with USCCB, leadership in the church. You've done and seen so many things. You just retired now? You riding off into the sunset? I know you're not. You're a guy that's always got something brewing. You're always working hard on something. I believe you're working with Laudato Si right now. What can you tell us about the work that you're doing?
Well, at first I haven't yet. I'm waiting for Tito to leave because I want his little rollerblade board because
He's done such a great job. We've prepared us, Tito, to leave.
Yeah, that's right. Great job, Tito.
I would like to take this moment to announce my retirement from.
well, I mean that the change is going to the change is taking place. So again, when I finished in Rome, I thought I was going to go back to Africa and I was going to work on issues. I've got some experience in peace and conflict resolution. And so I thought I'd go back and do that. I had a couple offers that we were exploring, and I went to. But I knew when I left Rome. I just needed time away. I needed time to stop and slow down. So I went with some of our friars on the Yukon River in the central part of Alaska, a town called Galena, or a little village, and spent 2 months there. And it was just a real time of stepping back, just to be able to think, read, breathe. And I thought, it was just going to be that. It was going to be slow paced. It was going to be just nothing. COVID was still on. And
who are you fooling?
Then all of a sudden, three things were jumping at me, and they weren't jumping. The first one wasn't jumping. There were no salmon in the river in the Yukon. There's some out in Bristol Bay, and that's not going to last much longer because of rising heat in the oceans. Because of that, parasites increase. The kelp and other things that the fish depend on, the whole chain. Those are interruptions in the. You're talking about interruptions in the supply chain. Look at the oceans, what's going on in the rivers, and that's what's happening. So there was no salmon, and I love salmon. And part of the reason I went to Alaska was so I could eat smoked salmon, and it wasn't there. I thought, this is what's going on now. And the second thing was I noticed the roads were kind of sinking, and I noticed some of the houses were sinking. The permafrost is melting. And if anyone knows anything about permafrost, about 11% of the world's land is permafrost. And it contains, I think it's 80 times the amount of carbon dioxide and methane gases that are being held in storage by nature. And as the permafrost melts, that is released into the atmosphere, and that creates what's called a positive loop, feedback loop. And we get the increased melting of the two poles, and rise of temperatures in general across the planet. And so I thought, okay, well, why am I seeing this? I don't want to see this, And then I'm
this is inconvenient.
I'm here to wind down, not to wind up again. And the third thing was the Athabascan people, much like all the indigenous people in the United States, the degree of the impact of the virus, of the COVID, was 2.5 times greater at all levels, from infection to death rates. And we were hearing stories every day of someone dying in the village or along the other villages where the friars were serving. And so I thought, what in the world is this? I got back from that, and I said, Francis and God and nature are speaking to me and saying, so I'm at Siena College. I've been working this year working and collaborating with Tito on some things as well, with other friars. And we've got this new Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology. We're trying to integrate the values of Laudato Si and the Canticle of the Creatures and the spirituality of Francis into the ethos of the college. And I think we're making some advances. We're also building out. We have 5 other Franciscan colleges and universities working with us, including St. Bonaventure's. So we've got this. We're looking to set up a national network on the Laudato Si Franciscan, and we have 4 right now. We have 4 centers. We have a center in Colombia. We have a center in Vietnam. We have a center in Rome. We have a center in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we're looking for Brazil as well. We want to build an international network, Franciscan network, Laudato Si, and what we want to do is we want to help. How can we strengthen each other's capacity in all the different countries? How can we internationalize and diversify Siena College in the process? So there's a lot of things that are going to take place, kind of things that can help. One can help the other, multiple benefits, which is the whole point of Laudato Si. Laudato Si, it opens up an incredible richness of new opportunities for all of us. It's not just on the environment. It's not just on the economy. It's on so many dimensions of our lives.
It's the interconnectivity that we all have. That's what Pope Francis is talking about. It's not just the environments, that we are responsible and connected to each other.
Yeah.
And I think what's great about the Laudato Si Center, at Siena, is that even from the ground level up, you're already kind of living that interconnectivity. The students who've gotten involved with you in that center are from different religious backgrounds, and it's this recognition that it affects all of us and that we should all kind of collaborate and work together on it.
Yeah, and I think we're hoping that we want to go after some major funding because we'd like to bring 10 new scholars a year to Siena. We'd like to eventually move toward, it won't be, we can't do this from the center, it has to be the academic side, but maybe get a master's in sustainability. People do minors and other things, they do that. Then they go back to their countries. They're going back to the Franciscan institutions from which they come. They can strengthen there the knowledge and the practice base. And so we're actually beginning to have this, what I call a global impact from Siena out, from a Franciscan college in the United States from our province of Our Lady of Guadalupe to the world. And I think that's kind of the big goal, if you will. We've got something coming up actually in October 10th and 11th, a major symposium. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, will be speaking. We've got a few other, but we also have students. We have recent graduates. We've got people working in grassroots projects around the capital, around the region here, and those working at the national level and international level. We're going to hear voices from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, voices in the United States that rarely get to be heard. Those will be short videos that will kind of bring those in, and we'll use those going forward with the center. So we've got this, so that's what I'm doing in my retirement.
It sounds amazing, and then heck of a retirement. I think the $100,000 question. We hear about this positive feedback loop. We hear about the supply chain in the ocean, falling apart. How do you get people to have hope? It just seems like such a big issue that we might be too far gone. Like, how do you get beyond that for people?
The biggest thing I think is we have to help people understand that we are responsible. We're in this together. This is something which Pope Francis made in his book on hope. It came out at the end toward the end of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and he wrote that book on hope. And it's just in there. It's just when we finally learn that we're all in one single boat together, and that we're all, the oars are there, and we have a choice to pick up the oars and row together. And I think this is something, that's where the hope comes in, as you get one after the other beginning to put the hand on the oar and to move forward together. And I think it's a long, you talk to you cited earlier, John Paul II, or even Benedict, but John Paul II in Poland. That went on, it was years they were working on trying to change the situation there. These are not, the one thing that's so difficult for us today, but it's been true for a long time, and it dictates our economy, it dictates our politics, everything. We only think short term. We only think between what can we get done in the quickest way possible, that for the greatest benefit for at personal level or the group level, instead of thinking long term and global. So I think I agree with you, Casey. I think it's important, and Tito kind of said it in an indirect way, that we are generators of hope. We're called to be generators of hope, not just simply waiting for hope to come to us. We have to be the very people who are the hope. And I think this is another message, another element. St. Francis of Assisi, I think it's clear from his experience there, he brought hope to people's lives, and because of that, they wanted to take a different direction. And I think the same thing is true with Pope Francis, and it is with us. And I think that's probably what this podcast and some of the other things that are being done through social media and through other ways, trying to generate a return. We say that I believe in God, we believe in God, but we forget the second part, because God believes in us. And I think that's something that's where the hope is. God believes in us, doesn't give up on us. That's it.
It's amazing. Even Tito.
Yeah.
With his hot sauce.
With my hot sauce and my mess. No, it really is. It's so important to remember that, out of town because I'm baptizing my friend's daughter tomorrow, and, their newborn baby, and here they are, and, my friend's mom, my friend's wife, the mom, she said, I don't know if I can do this. And I was like, absolutely you can, because God's going to give you the grace to do it. And that's the thing. Like, if it's up to us by ourselves, we're going to fall short. But it's recognizing that we can do it together, and we do it collaboratively, not just with each other, but with God. God gives us the grace. God strengthens us and gives us light.
Yep.
Yeah, which is why we look to our illustrious leaders, the people who have gone before us and made huge strides, like you, Michael, as Minister General, working the USCCB, continuing just to be a great brother, someone who inspires those you live with to be a little bit better. So we want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for continuing on, fighting the good fight, but doing so in a Christian way. You know, we love the peace, the work of reconciliation. You've set an example for so many of us, and we can't thank you enough for it.
Oh, thank you. And I don't know, I take a fair amount of your audience will be young people. So please, to the young people who might be eventually following this, please know, we believe in you. The Friars, we're convinced that from Rome and big meetings we've had already from 2018, but even prior to that, we've identified you as a primary source of our hope. We've identified you as a primary source of our courage. We've identified you, the young people, as a primary source of inspiration. So let's work together. Let's move forward together.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Tito, what a guy. What a giant.
Yep, absolutely. I remember, I think we met him during our novitiate, but I really got to know him in Rome, and just a really inspiring figure just because of his humility and willingness to just engage and talk to anyone.
Well, and it's so rare that you find someone that is a big dreamer that also gets stuff done. Because I think you're a really big dreamer, and I'm the one who gets stuff done, and we kind of complement each other in that way. But to see it in one person is just incredible.
I mean, hey, you're absolutely right. It's difficult to one person to embody both, the dreaming and the doing. And so I've got the dreaming, you've got the doing. Let's figure out what we're going to do next.
Well, what are we going to do next? We've got a couple more people lined up already. Can't wait for it. We've got a trip lined up. I guess we can say here, Tito, you and I are going to California this summer, going to VidCon.
That's right.
So I don't know if any of the people watching here are going to be at VidCon, but look for us there. We might record something there, might make some videos, but looking to go out and listen to the people, because that's what we're all about.
And looking forward to learning. I always love learning new things.
Wonderful. Well, bye, Jennifer, Julia. Who are we saying bye to?
Liz.
Bye, Liz.
Bye, Liz.